It's been 20 years, and 20 years is enough. Now we have to get it done.
Welcome to the Governing the Seas, the podcast from the Law of the Sea and Ocean Governance Seminar at the Geneva Graduate Institute. I'm your host, Laisa Branco, and today we're highlighting a landmark development in global fisheries governance, the new WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. For the first time, governments have collectively adopted binding multilateral provisions to regulate fisheries subsidies that contribute to overfishing as well as subsidies to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, also known as IUU fishing. This agreement, adopted by the World Trade Organization here in Geneva, has been in force since the 15th of September. It establishes a comprehensive legal framework that disciplines certain forms of fisheries subsidies, aiming to address long-standing gaps in international law and support the sustainability of marine resources globally. I'm delighted to be joined today by two distinguished guests. Ambassador Matthew Wilson is Barbados' permanent representative to the UN and WTO in Geneva, as well as ambassador to Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. With experience in trade and development, he currently chairs the WTO Working Group on Small Businesses and has held key roles at the International Trade Center and WTO. He holds degrees in psychology, sociology, international relations, and an MBA Essentials, and is active on several international boards and committees. I'm also joined by Jonathan Werner, who manages the WTO Fish Fund. The Fish Fund is a new environmental fund set up to give support to WTO members in implementing the disciplines of the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. He brings over 15 years of experience in international trade and development, with key roles at the WTO, OECD, and the Enhanced Integrated Framework for LDCs. Well, thank you, first of all, for joining us today. Perhaps I will start with you, Ambassador. You've been involved in the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement negotiations since the early stages. Could you perhaps walk us through some of the major highlights over the years and maybe touch upon the key points of contention that came up?
No, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for putting a spotlight on some good news in the multilateral system when we really do need some good news. So this fishery subsidies negotiations were actually launched in 2001, a long time ago. The basis of that negotiations, however, was very much on trade and the trade and market distorting nature of subsidies. So it was very much in the vein of what the WTO was at that point in time, very trade, rules, and regulation focus. Then in 2015, the UN SDGs were launched, SDG 14.6 in particular, which called for eliminating harmful fishery subsidies. And this gave really some new urgency to the talks, because all of a sudden it shifted from it being just a trade and market distorting issue to all of a sudden becoming an environmental and sustainability issue. And all of a sudden, it opened everyone's eyes to actually what the WTO could do, not just for trade, but also for the environment. And indeed, what we were able to do in September is the first time we've had a multilateral agreement that actually has this very concrete sustainability dimension. Now, I was a very young negotiator at the time, back in those days, and I'm really, really happy to say that it was small island developing states like Barbados that actually was able to bring this kind of more human dimension into the negotiations. So one of the most significant contributions that small island developing states and small vulnerable economies made in those early days was the introduction into the mandate of language on livelihoods, poverty alleviation, and food security. Because before, like I said, it was really just about the trade rules and regulations, and then, of course, the sustainability dimension. But we brought in the whole human dimension, that there was a livelihoods dimension to this, that it actually mattered for people in small countries who lived on the coast, that it mattered for artisanal fishers, that there was a nutritional dimension to this as well. There was even a cultural dimension to fisheries. So for me, this was a really important contribution from small island developing states that I think marked a turning point in the discussions as well. And there were many issues throughout the last 20 years that led to a bit of a stop and start. And I think what frustrated me and many others was, if we cared about the ocean so much, if we cared about the sustainability of fisheries, if we cared about the stock depletion, and we know that right now this 37%, I think, of the world stocks are depleted, surely this is something that should have a degree of urgency. Surely we should not have taken 20 plus years to do this. But unfortunately, this is the nature of multilateral trade negotiations. But we got there. We got there, and as you said, in September, we were able to have this first agreement focus on IUU fishing, which I think will have a very dramatic impact, because many of us, especially small coastal states, we're not able to secure our waters. And there's a lot of IUU fishing happening, which has had an incredibly negative impact on fishery stocks. So I think already the signal that this sends is we will not tolerate IUU fishing. Now we just need to get the second part of the agreement on board, which very much focuses on subsidies that goes to overfishing and overcapacity. And I think it's really important that we do this, because when you look at the facts are really quite stark. More than a third of global stocks were fished beyond their biological limits, and is only getting worse. Every year is getting worse. When you add to that the climate change element, you see that there's going to be a disastrous impact on fishery stocks. So we need to do something now. If you look at, for example, in the coastal waters off of Africa, over half of those stocks are overfished. If you look at in the Med or the Black Sea, 65% of those stocks are unsustainably sourced. And these are facts, it's not conjecture. So we need to do something about it.
Thank you so much. And you kind of touched upon my next question, which is essentially kind of the challenges for your country, Barbados, but also for small island states. You've mentioned enforcement. Would you also mention some other key challenges ahead especially for SIDS? And I guess I'm thinking here especially on capacity building and the technologies required also to implement this agreement.
I think people sometimes underestimate how small our administrations are, how we're trying to juggle and grapple with so many different priorities. But fisheries is a priority for us because, like I said, it's a livelihood issue as well. It's not just an economic issue. It's also a social issue. It's a food security issue. It's a nutritional issue. It's a job creating issue. So it's something that we need to care about. And it's also about building out the industry and the sector as well, looking at more value addition. So, we want to use our fisheries sector as part of a sector that drives our economic growth. But we know that we need to do it sustainably. Small island developing states have always been on the front lines of the climate crisis. So we know why sustainability matters. And part of that sustainability is also having appropriate management. And this is where, and I know you'll get to this a bit later with Jonathan, this is why the Fish Fund is so important for us, because it gives us a facility to discuss fisheries management issues. It gives us a facility to be able to develop certain projects, to be able to improve and enhance our fisheries management regime as well. And I think that one should not underestimate or overestimate rather how important appropriate management is, but how expensive appropriate management can be, especially for small island developing states. You need the technology, you need the boats, you need the analysis, you need the manpower. And this is something that I'm really happy that the WTO kind of architecture has recognized and has facilitated for us.
Yeah. Since you've mentioned the fish fund, let me bring Jonathan to this conversation. So, Jonathan, you lead the Fisheries Funding Mechanism Trust Fund, which often we call it the Fish Fund for short. So, could you perhaps briefly explain to our listeners what the fund's main purposes is and its key objectives?
Absolutely, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. So the key aspect, the key mandate and objective of the fund is to support LDCs and developing country members in integrating fisheries-related elements into their national strategies and national policies in line with the new WTO agreement on fishery subsidies. So from there, and we can get a little bit into the specifics of how we actually support that, but from there, for the last, I would say, 18 months, 2 years, we've been establishing the fund and thankful to not only the engagement of beneficiaries, but contribution from members. We have around a little bit over actually $18 million between commitments and pledges. And we just closed the first call for proposals last week. So we received several applications from LDCs and developing country members, and we're going through a very specific and pre-established process, but we are very much in line with supporting exactly what Ambassador Wilson said. Enabling WTO members with support to implement the provisions of the agreement.
So I've seen also that the Fish Fund, you have two different sets of categories, right, of projects. So perhaps you could explain to us, when it comes to more practical support, what kind of projects or assistance does the fund prioritize for different countries?
So what was agreed with the membership after long, very productive discussions, were to establish two main types of grants. The first one, creatively called Category 1, has a limit of around $50,000, and it is mainly designed so members can do what we call a needs assessment. They can do an X-ray of their current policies and practices and see what they actually need to do to become aligned with the agreement. Second is they can also use that for project formulation, right? I mean, we're talking about gigantic issues, and these are relatively small grants. So you can use these $50,000 to develop bigger proposals that you can then take not only to the Fish Fund, but also to partners and leverage additional resources. Then you have the second category, which goes up to grants up to $300,000, and these have 5 initial pre-established topic areas that members can apply for in accordance to their needs. So there's a lot of members will need to update their legislation, for example. They can use the grants for that. A lot of members will need support with fisheries management systems, updates, setting them up, data collection and stock assessments. So these are also very important. All of these are available in great detail at our website. So, and you can also, and we are a partnership, right? The Fish Fund is housed at the WTO, but it also has at its core partners the FAO, IFAD, and the World Bank, and together, the idea is that the Fish Fund will help leverage even bigger pots of resources that will support the WTO membership to implement the disciplines of the agreement.
Definitely. I mean, what you're hearing here is that it's a win-win. There is no negative externality to improving fisheries management. There is no negative outcome of being able to update and improve your legislation. There is no negative element of being able to secure and govern your waters better. So this really is a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, and I guess from a historical point of view, I was wondering also you've been part of the negotiations, you're managing the fund now. I guess what kind of role does it play? And just looking at more of a historical perspective, because now also in environmental agreements, you tend to have more funds coming in. I'm thinking here of the regime for mining, in which we had previously the kind of benefits being shared directly to states. And this is slowly transitioning into funds, right? Managed by institutions, managed by international organizations. So just thinking more of a historical perspective, how this idea of the fish fund developed, and how do you see some of the main challenges you might encounter in managing this fund now that the agreement is in force?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think to the negotiations, I'll ask Matthew to step in. I wasn't part of the negotiations at that point. I was brought in afterwards. So I think two main points here. So the fund the fish fund is new, but the model is not. Well, it's not old either, but it's not super new in the sense that there are other envisioned support measures for other WTO agreements. What is innovative here, in particular to the fish fund, is in addition to that, it is as Matthew spoke, like it's a convergence of trade, sustainability, and environment, right? To your specific question on managing. So to give you an idea, the steering committee of the Fish Fund is composed of 8 members that have contributed to the fund, 8 members that will benefit from the fund. They each represent very big constituencies behind them, the constituencies that are very heterogeneous. And in addition to that, there is very close involvement and collaboration, which has been absolutely fantastic with other international organizations. So the challenge, which is also a blessing, is to have a lot of moving parts and a lot of different viewpoints that come together, right? We've just closed the first call for proposals, I mentioned. So this is the first time we're really running this process, which has been very smooth sailing at this point, I have to say. I mean, so the challenge is we go out of our way to really be as inclusive as we possibly can with the resources we have, right? But that's also very gratifying, right? On the history of the negotiation, I mean, as far as I understand, this was very much part and parcel since the beginning. The idea of the recognition that certain members needed that support, right? And then this was enshrined in the agreement, Article 7. Right, so it's very much part and parcel of the whole architecture, the whole framework of the agreement. I'm not sure if you have anything to.
I would say, the only thing more important than concluding an international agreement is implementing an international agreement. Yeah. And a lot of people sometimes think the work ends when an agreement is concluded. No, that's when it begins, because now you really have to see how this thing works and the kind of impact it's going to have. And the Fish Fund does take inspiration from actually something I was involved in maybe 10, 12 years ago, and that was the negotiations on trade facilitation and the trade facilitation agreement, where in a very novel way, we came up with not just categories of needs, but also we said that developing countries would not have to adopt these measures unless and until they had the assistance and the ability to do so. That meant either more time or it meant capacity building, i.e., some financial assistance. So it took inspiration, I think, from that, where there was a trade facilitation agreement trust fund as well. I will say, however, that as it stands today, no one is actually committing to the trade facilitation trust fund anymore. That's both good and bad. It's good because it meant that implementation has happened, but it is bad because it means that some countries, developing countries, have still not yet been able to implement some aspects of the agreement and the funding has dried up. But we know what the whole developmental assistance landscape is like. So I'm really happy and pleased that the Fish Fund has been supported the way that it has been.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of this and kind of the long-term, well, I could say the long-term impact of the Fish Fund. How do you see the Fish Fund in the long? That's more or less my question. How do you see the Fish Fund on the long term? Because we see the agreement now. It, as you said, it's been adopted and has been has entered into force. But overfishing and IUU fishing is a problem that, at least in my view, has not only long-term impact, but it's a problem. Is a more complex problem than you can perhaps see it on the paper. So, yeah, how do you see it in terms of the long-term impact of the Fish Fund? And you said that you have this kind of first batch of projects coming in. How do you see it? How do you envision it for the future? Perhaps how many different rounds of categories you would have, in the upcoming years?
So specifically on how many rounds, I mean, the clear answer is I don't know. Depends on funding, depends on interest, depends on, most importantly, the measures that are implemented throughout the years and how and what is the actual need for the fund. Right now, what we can confidently say based on facts and the numbers we've received, and Barbados sits in the steering committee. So Matthew might have the middle long term vision as well. What is important? So first, there will be rounds for applications, right? I mean, in the very near future. That's point number one. I think on the challenges, there are two very clear things, right? One, I think, one I alluded first, which is these are relatively small grants for gigantic challenges. So the issue is how to adequately use the Fish Fund to leverage resources and capacity and continue generating positive momentum. So the different members have the ability to implement the agreement, right? And tied to that, but even stepping a little bit out, is how does this support from the fund fit into other initiatives that are connected, right? There's an environmental component, there's a sustainability component, there's a climate component, there's a social component, livelihoods. Fishing and fishing practices touch upon so many different communities and lives in different ways from an economic, social standpoint, that, how bringing these things together, right? And not, and keeping the big picture in mind, as well as kind of the operations.
Let me be less diplomatic than Jonathan. Do you know how much money goes to global fishing subsidies every year? 35 billion. Do you know how much of that supports harmful practices like overfishing and illegal fishing? 22 billion. Imagine if that 22 billion was to be channeled towards more environmentally sustainable elements. Imagine if that 22 billion, even a third of that, were to go to helping developing countries improve their management, or to go to reskilling fishermen or fisherfolk, for example. Imagine how transformative that will be. So the problem will not be one of liquidity. The problem will be one of political commitment to this process. Because what Jonathan and his team have done is that they've put together a fund which I think covers all the bases. It covers monitoring, it covers evaluation, it covers outreach. It will definitely show why the investment matters and is having an impact. So I think what they've built is very robust. We just have got to make sure that, one, the need is there, the interest is there, and the donors continue to see this as something important to invest in for the global commons. And it will also mean getting more donors on board, more non-traditional donors as well. And also, as Jonathan said, being able to use this funding as seed funding and to leverage additional funding, including domestic resource mobilization and investment as well in developing countries, I think would also be important.
And I think it sits also in this kind of new momentum for not just fishing, but other resources at sea as well. You see a lot of different parallel negotiations going on. But in fishing, especially, you see a lot of innovation. You have a lot of new technologies that can also support in this task. And I guess it's just my final question, and for both of you. Just thinking of this innovation and everything that we discussed here today, are there any particular areas where more innovation or support is needed to make sure this agreement's goals are met?
I think data. We need to show why the agreement on fishery subsidies is having an impact on IUU, and we need data to show this actually working, because that's crucial. We need data to show that the support that countries are getting to improve their fisheries management is actually helping to improve the nature of their stocks. So data and evidence and the voice and perspective of the fisher folk is so important. You know, for me, for Barbados to get us to agree to the agreement on fishery subsidies, I had to speak directly to the fisher folk. And I'm talking about actual fishermen and fisher women bringing in their hulls, bringing in their boats. We had a Zoom meeting with them at midnight, Geneva time, with my minister to explain to them what this agreement was all about and why it is good for them. And they gave us the okay to move forward with this agreement. So many of us also have standing behind us hundreds of thousands of fishing communities who want to see this agreement make a difference for their daily lives and for their culture of fishing. So this is bigger than just trade. It's even bigger than just sustainability. It really is, like I said, going to the very heart of the livelihoods of millions of fisherfolk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think so first the agreement itself is from an institutional and conceptual perspective very innovative in the sense that it's bringing together these three elements that hadn't been brought before, right? The environmental and trade dynamic with sustainability speaking directly to implementation of SDG 14, right? Now, from a more traditional innovative in the technological sense, I'm not a techie person, but every day I'm just amazed about how things not only evolve, but from an application perspective, like satellite imagery monitoring vessels, technology that could potentially reduce the cost of stock assessments, which, as Matthew said, is absolute key. The premise of the agreement and the fund is data driven, science backed. Implementation policy, those are the drivers. So in that sense, technology is and technology innovation. I mean, we can't afford not be plugged in, right?
I've been hearing this a lot recently about information is key, right? I've been hearing this a lot recently about information is key, right? Data and information, and having institutional mechanisms to allow this information and data to be shared, but also have an accountability, an institutional accountability for how this information is shared and adequately transmitted through institutional settings. Wow, thank you so much. This has been very insightful, and I've learned a lot, and I guess also our listeners. Thank you so much, and I guess, thank you so much for cut out. Thank you so much for this very engaging conversation and helping our listeners understand the importance and the real-world impact of the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement and the Fish Fund. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in into the Governing the Seas. If you would like to learn more about the law of the sea and ocean governance seminar at the Geneva Graduate Institute, be sure to check out our website. Until next time, I'm Laisa Branco, and wishing you all a sustainable week ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
C'est la vision d'une belle horreur, comme il ne s'en fait plus depuis 2 millénaires. J'ai l'impression d'être encore celle qui a vu faner les toutes premières fleurs. Je ne vais pas ramasser les pétales de mon cœur. Je pleure à de son malheur. Tu ne m'as pas vu quand je t'ai connu, ni vu ni connu dans le bleu des yeux. Je me berce au son de ta voix, à chacun de tes pas je tremble et je bois. Mais j'oublierai ton prénom à la prochaine saison, j'espère.